remember the first time I saw him, Tristan Vale. He walked into Kendrick's Lab's main office like a man arriving to claim his throne. Navy suit so sharp it looked airbrushed, hair slicked back like a movie villain, expensive watch flashing every time he moved his hand. He gave off the air of someone used to being the smartest guy in the room, even when he clearly wasn't. "Call me Tristan," he said, flashing a grin that looked like it belonged on a billboard, not in a boardroom. "We're going to make this place leaner, faster, bolder. Time to shake things up." There was a pause. A few hesitant claps followed. That brand of uncomfortable applause you hear at talent shows and company pep rallies. I didn't clap. I didn't even shift in my chair. I just folded my arms and stared at the man who had no idea what this company even did, at least not beyond the investor reports. I had been with Kendrick's Labs for 10 years. 10 years of firewalls, incident responses, system recoveries, all-nighters, and rebuilding after a ransomware hit nearly brought us down. 10 years of keeping the lights on while executives came and went with buzzwords and exit packages. But this, Tristan, was something new. And he had no clue who I was. In our first leadership meeting, he glanced over the org chart, stopped at my name, and said, "Avery, tech support, right?" I tilted my head slightly. "Director of Systems Engineering." He didn't even blink. "Right, tech stuff." I saw it then. The kind of man who equates technical expertise with background noise. The kind who thinks the product runs on good vibes and leadership vision. I could already feel the storm coming. That week, he canceled our architecture reviews and replaced them with momentum syncs and growth huddles. He asked the product team to consider gamifying the internal security dashboard. He said things like, "We need a sleek vibe," and "This whole data thing, can we AI it?" I kept my expression neutral. But inside, something curled into a tight, waiting coil. Because the system he was about to start poking around in, the core infrastructure Kendrick's Labs ran on, wasn't just something I had worked on. I built it. 6 years ago, in the aftermath of a breach that nearly destroyed our client trust, I rewrote our entire back-end framework. Secure, modular, scalable, efficient, my blueprint, my architecture, my sleepless nights, and most importantly, my patent. A decision made under the advice of our old CEO, who said, "Cover yourself. If they ever forget what you built, you'll have proof." It was in the fine print of my contract. Not exactly hidden, but not where anyone lazy enough to skim would notice. It required my explicit consent for any major changes, renewals, or continued use of the patented system. Tristan never read it. Of course he didn't. By Thursday, he had fired 3 team leads. By email. One had just returned from maternity leave. Another had led our zero downtime migration the year before. He called it streamlining the org. On Friday, I overheard him say in the hallway, "We need fewer relics around here and more disruptors." That was the moment I started documenting everything. Because Tristan Vale had no idea what he had walked into. But he was about to find out. The second week under Tristan's reign felt like watching a toddler play with a loaded nail gun. He came in hot every morning, full of vague philosophies about agile dominance and next-gen synergy, then spent the day dismantling everything that actually worked. First, he scrapped our incident response protocol, calling it bloated. Then he instructed the infrastructure team to consolidate 3 secure environments into one cloud-light solution, despite not knowing what the term even meant. And then, with a gleam in his eye, he suggested using a third-party plugin, one with a known exploit, for customer login. When I raised the security risks in a meeting, he interrupted me with a tight smile. "Avery, I appreciate your caution, but let's try not to fear innovation." Fear innovation? I was the reason this company still had clients. I was the one who kept our system stable through a 3-day DDoS attack and the one who authored the fallback protocol for our encrypted customer data. But in his eyes, I was a legacy obstacle, a shadow in the corner. That Tuesday, he walked past me in the hallway and casually said, "Hey, you should start working with the design team. Let's make our back end look more visual. Back end, visual. It was like telling a structural engineer to add glitter to concrete. I started keeping a journal of every interaction, not out of spite, out of necessity. I'd seen enough disasters to know that arrogance paired with ignorance wasn't just annoying, it was dangerous, especially when it came from the top. Then, midweek, a whisper reached me. Tristan was in talks with a consulting firm, one that promised a full rebuild of our core system for half the cost. The same system I designed, the one I owned. He wanted to rip out the engine and replace it with pretty stickers, without asking where the key was. What he didn't know, what no one except a few people from the old guard remembered, was that 5 years ago, when Kendricks nearly folded from that ransomware hit, I didn't just fix the mess. I created the solution. I built an entirely new framework from scratch, one that allowed modular recovery, real-time threat detection, and secure scaling across platforms. And on the advice of then CEO Joanne Mendez, I filed a provisional patent under my name. When the company stabilized, I finalized it. The kicker? Kendricks never purchased it outright. They licensed it, year by year. The licensing clause was tucked into my contract, along with a note that any continuation or upgrade required my direct involvement. The agreement was due to expire on Sunday, the upcoming Sunday, and no one in leadership had renewed it, because no one had looked, because no one had asked. And Tristan? He was too busy playing visionary to notice the countdown ticking. That Thursday afternoon, he stood in front of the company during an all-hands meeting and announced that Kendricks 2.0 was coming. Faster, smarter, flashier. He talked about synergy, growth, momentum. He never once mentioned the system that made all of it possible. I sat there, arms folded, face unreadable. But inside, I was smiling. Because I didn't need to lift a finger. The clock was already running. Friday started deceptively quiet. The sky was gray, the office quieter than usual, like the air before a thunderclap. I was reviewing code snippets and finalizing a report on system performance when I heard a knock on my open office door. Tristan leaned against the frame like he was posing for a magazine cover. Confident, casual, completely unaware. "Avery, you got a sec?" I didn't answer right away, just gestured toward the chair across from my desk. He didn't sit. Of course not. "I'll be blunt," he began, using that particular tone that men like him believe sounds noble, but lands more like condescension. "You've been here a long time. Maybe too long. The company's evolving and we need people who can match the pace." I tilted my head slightly, just enough to make it clear I was listening, but not impressed. "What are you saying?" I asked, even though I already knew. He sighed like this was hard for him. "We're letting you go. Effective immediately. Your role is being consolidated. You'll get a severance package. HR has the details." It was so polished, so rehearsed. Not a flinch of remorse, not a hint of respect. I looked at him for a long moment. Not angry, not even surprised, just still. He had no idea what he'd just done. He had no idea what I owned. No idea that the system he was standing on like a stage, his grand vision, his buzzword playground, was licensed under my name and my terms. No idea that, without my written consent, Kendricks Labs was about to become a company with a non-functioning heart. But I didn't tell him any of that. I simply stood, extended my hand. "Understood." He didn't take my hand, just gave a smug little nod and turned away, tossing one last remark over his shoulder as he walked out. "I'm not spending another dime on an employee who peaked 5 years ago." I smiled, not bitter, not broken, just aware. He thought he had the upper hand. He thought I'd vanished quietly, nursing my pride and clutching my box of belongings. Instead, I spent the next 30 minutes packing methodically. My certifications, a couple of personal books, a framed photo from the early days, and a small succulent I'd somehow kept alive through 4 office moves. and a USB drive, containing nothing sensitive, just old pictures from a team retreat. I left everything else. The real value never lived on my desk. As I walked through the main floor, heads turned. Some people looked away. Others gave me small, unsure nods. No one spoke. That's what fear looks like in corporate America. Silence in the face of power. But I wasn't afraid. By the time I reached my car, my hands were trembling. Not from sadness, from adrenaline. Because the insult hadn't landed the way he thought it would. He thought he'd erased me. But he had just activated me. And I was curious. Curious how long it would take before someone in that shiny glass building realized what they had just lost. The answer? Monday. The weekend moved like a gathering storm, quiet, steady, charged with something electric humming just beneath the surface. I didn't tell anyone I'd been fired. Not my sister, who'd always worried I was married to my job. Not my best friend, who would have shown up with tequila and a whiteboard labeled Operation Burn It All Down. And definitely not my ex, who once said you care more about servers than people. I needed silence. Not the panicked kind, but the kind you can stretch out in. The kind that makes room for clarity. Friday night, I walked the length of the city alone. Past closed bookstores, half-lit bars, and that old pier where I used to sit during university and dream of building something that mattered. The air was bitter. I welcomed it. It burned the edges off the sting still lodged in my chest. Because I wasn't grieving a job. I was grieving the arrogance, the dismissal, the way someone could stand on the bones of your work, wave a new flag, and call you obsolete. By Saturday morning, that grief was gone. In its place was precision. I opened the folder tucked away in my personal files, one I hadn't needed in years. Inside were the patent documents, the licensing clause, the notarized agreement signed by Kendrick's former leadership. The language was crisp. Use of proprietary framework titled Modular Adaptive Threat Infrastructure is licensed to Kendrick's Labs for a period of five years, renewable annually upon direct written consent from the patent holder, Avery Morgan. That renewal? Due by midnight Sunday. There it was. Black and white. Undeniable. I drafted the email slowly, with care. No emotion. Just facts. Subject line: Notice of intellectual property, usage expiration. Immediate attention required to Kendrick's Legal Department, CC, CTO, former legal advisor, and yes, Tristan Vale. I laid it out clearly. The expiration date, the terms, the breach of agreement if the system continued to operate past the deadline without my authorization, the legal consequences. The system patent number, registration, and my formal signature. I signed it. Avery Morgan patent holder, Modular Adaptive Threat Infrastructure, former Director of Systems Engineering, Kendrick's Labs. Then I closed my laptop, changed into running shoes, and disappeared into the woods. 4 miles, no music, just me, my breath, and the thump of feet on damp ground. It wasn't revenge I was after. It was acknowledgement. And if it had to come in the form of urgent emails, server failures, and legal fire drills, so be it. By Sunday afternoon, I noticed the first tremors. 2 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. 1 voicemail from HR. Hi, Avery. We're hoping to clarify something about your departure. Another from legal. Please call us regarding the status of the system architecture agreement. And then at 10:17 p.m., as the rain started tapping against my window, an email from Tristan himself landed in my inbox. Subject: Urgent, contract misunderstanding. Body: Avery, I believe there's been a miscommunication regarding system ownership. I'd appreciate the opportunity to connect with you directly and resolve the situation before business resumes Monday. Please call me as soon as possible. Tristan. There it was. The panic. I didn't reply. Let them sweat. Let them walk into Monday unaware that the heartbeat of their entire infrastructure had just expired. Because when a system fails, it doesn't explode. It slips, quietly, until it's gone. I was awake before the sun. The kettle hissed softly as I poured water into my mug, the scent of dark roast filling my small apartment. My laptop was already open, my phone fully charged, notifications still off. I sat cross-legged on my couch in a worn hoodie and socks, sipping coffee while watching the clock tick toward 800 a.m., the official start of the Kendricks Labs workday. At exactly 8:07, my inbox lit up like a Christmas tree. Subject, system error. Back-end authentication, failed urgency. High impact, full client dashboard offline. Internal tools unresponsive. More emails flooded in. Subject, urgent, CRM, not loading, sales team locked out. Subject, DevOps escalation, API, gateway failure. Subject, emergency stand-up requested. And then, finally, a name I'd been waiting for. From Tristan Vale. Subject, Avery, please call me now. A few seconds later, my phone rang. I answered. Avery. Tristan's voice cracked with forced calm layered over unmistakable panic. We need to talk. I wasn't aware of the patent situation. Let's get you back in the office and figure this out. I cut him off gently. Calm. Measured. Tristan, I'm happy to discuss the licensing terms, but not a job. Silence. Then he said, let's not make this personal. I took a slow sip of coffee. It's not personal, it's contractual. And then I hung up. By 8:32, my inbox exploded again. A message from Nicole, my old teammate in product. Nicole, did you do this? Please tell me you did this. Max is losing it. Entire system's down. Clients are calling nonstop. The board's been looped in. I smiled. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. This wasn't sabotage. This was the natural result of a system run without understanding, led by someone who thought vision alone could replace architecture. At 9:12 a.m., I walked into the Kendricks building, not through the side employee entrance I'd used for years, but through the main glass doors. My heels echoed against the marble floor, sharp and deliberate. Heads turned, conversations faltered. I wasn't here as someone returning. I was here as someone reintroducing herself, with leverage. The front desk receptionist blinked when she saw me. Ms. Morgan? I have a meeting with legal, I said with a polite smile. She picked up the phone with slightly trembling fingers and dialed. A moment later, she nodded. 7th floor. They're waiting. In the elevator, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored panel. Shoulders back, expression calm, eyes steady. It wasn't vanity I saw. It was certainty, because I wasn't here to reclaim a title. I was here to remind them what happens when you erase the wrong person. The legal team was already seated when I entered the conference room. Their posture stiff, expressions carefully composed. The company's general counsel stood to greet me. Avery, he said, his voice smooth but clipped. We appreciate you coming in. We want to resolve this swiftly and amicably. Of course, I replied, setting down my folder. I'm all for clean resolutions. I assume you've reviewed the licensing clause? He nodded. We have. Your claim is valid. The system patent is registered under your name. Continued use without renewal constitutes a violation. We'd like to propose a retroactive extension. Same terms, 1-year agreement, full access. I smiled slightly. That won't work for me. A ripple of tension passed around the room. I'm not here to return to old terms, I said evenly. I'm here to renegotiate. Fairly. They hesitated. You're currently experiencing downtime, correct? I asked, though we all knew the answer. A quiet nod. Then let's talk numbers. I opened my folder and slid a document across the table. Licensing proposal. $1.5 million for the next 12 months. Renewable quarterly. Non-exclusive use. System support provided through me or a consultant I approve. Public attribution in company documentation. System designed and patented by Avery Morgan. They stared. It wasn't a bluff. The figure was aligned with market standards, if anything, conservative, considering their entire tech stack depended on it. One legal associate cleared her throat. That's a significant increase. It's reflective of value, I said. Something this company seems to have forgotten how to measure. The general counsel looked down at the proposal, jaw tight. We'll need to take this to the board. I leaned back, folding my hands. I'll wait. Because what came next wasn't about a paycheck. It was about something far more powerful. Visibility. And for the first time in a long time, they were finally starting to see me. By the time I stepped out of the conference room, the entire floor felt different. The silence was taut now, charged. Staff tiptoed through the hallway like stepping across glass, whispering behind coffee cups, darting glances toward the closed doors. I waited in the lounge with a bottle of water and my phone on silent. I wasn't scrolling. I wasn't texting. I was listening. At 10:03, I spotted him, Tristan, pacing just beyond the glass partition, his designer shoes squeaking faintly against the polished tile. He hadn't seen me yet. But when he did, he froze mid-step. First confusion, then realization, then something he didn't wear often. Unease. He walked toward me, slower than usual, each step heavy with forced control. Avery, he said. His voice was smoother now, quieter, too civil to be casual, too tense to be friendly. Didn't expect to see you in person. No, I said calm. You didn't expect a lot of things. He gave a tight laugh and shoved his hands into his pockets, trying to look relaxed. Look, I think this whole thing's been blown out of proportion. We should have had a real conversation before lawyers got involved. You mean before you fired me? I tilted my head. That decision was based on incomplete information, he said with a practiced shrug. No, I replied, standing. It was based on ego. And now you're dealing with the consequences. His smile faltered. I didn't let him speak again. I'm not angry, Tristan. I'm simply done being underestimated. I've documented everything, the patent, the licensing terms, the internal notices, your email firing me without review. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to negotiate. He opened his mouth again, probably to regain control of the narrative, but I was already walking past him toward the elevator. Oh, and Tristan? I turned slightly over my shoulder. Good luck. The doors slid closed. That word, luck, it followed him like a shadow, but I'd never needed it. I had preparation, I had proof, and now, finally, I had leverage. At 11:11, the legal team called me back in. This time, the energy in the room had shifted. They were seated straighter, voices more careful. The board hadn't joined physically, but I could feel their presence behind every word. Invisible, but watching. The general counsel folded his hands and met my eyes. We've reviewed your proposal, he said. Measured. And while we find the terms aggressive, accurate, I corrected. He paused, then nodded. Accurate. We're prepared to accept the licensing rate with one caveat. A 6-month term, renewable quarterly as you suggested. As for the attribution, he glanced down at his notes. We'd prefer to phrase it as a technical collaboration rather than full patent credit. I leaned forward. No. He looked up, confused. Excuse me? I want it stated clearly and publicly, I said. System designed and patented by Avery Morgan. No softened language. No sanitized phrasing. No vague titles. The air in the room froze. I kept going. For 6 years, Kendrick's Labs ran on the system I built. You scaled it, sold it, branded it, but you never credited it. That ends now. I'm not walking away nameless so someone else can save face. The associate to my left scribbled something in her notebook. The advisor frowned. The general counsel adjusted his glasses, then nodded slowly. We'll take that to the board. Do that, I said, gathering my folder. And while you're at it, I'd advise transparency. The SEC doesn't take kindly to unreported licensing conflicts, especially those that cause system-wide outages. You know that. That landed like a hammer. Because beneath all the corporate polish, that was the nightmare. Regulatory scrutiny, audits, shareholder panic. I knew their worst fears better than they did. Because I'd built the thing they were now fighting to hold on to. As I stepped out of the room, the hallway buzzed again. And there she was, Nicole, leaning casually by the elevator, phone in hand. When she saw me, her face broke into a crooked grin. They're calling you the firewall, she whispered. I let out a soft laugh. Better than being called redundant. She chuckled, then leaned closer. People are talking. Tristan's in full spin mode. Telling the board it was all a misunderstanding. He's claiming you never disclosed the licensing expiration. I raised an eyebrow. That's a lie. I know. We all saw the memo. You CC'd legal. There's paper everywhere. Even the interns are whispering about it like it's Watergate. I didn't reply, because my mind had already moved ahead, past the chaos, past the panic, to what would come next. Because this wasn't over. This was only the middle. And what was coming next? That was going to be even bigger. That night, while the company scrambled to contain its collapse, I made one more move. I didn't email legal. I didn't email Tristan. I went straight to the top. I still had the direct email address of Clara Reese, Candrix's board chair, a holdover from a cross-departmental innovation task force we co-led 5 years earlier. She was smart, measured, the kind of person who actually read footnotes and followed quiet voices. Subject: System licensing, conflict and leadership misconduct. The body of the email was short, surgical, and backed by time-stamped attachments. I outlined the scope of the patented system, the expiration of the licensing agreement, my documented communications, and the legal notices ignored by current leadership. I also included Tristan's decision to terminate a key architect without understanding internal IP dependencies. I closed with a single question. If this is how your CEO handles critical infrastructure and internal expertise, how can you trust him to manage vendors, regulators, or shareholders? Then I hit send and walked away from my laptop. No second draft, no emotional edits, just facts. Powerfully quiet facts. The response came 12 hours later. Not from Clara directly, but from a senior board liaison. Avery, thank you for your clarity and professionalism. The board takes this matter seriously. We are reviewing all documentation internally. In the meantime, we fully support your proposed licensing arrangement and expect the agreement to be finalized within 48 hours. We regret that your contributions were not acknowledged sooner. Jonathan McKay. Board Affairs, Candrix Labs. I read it twice. It wasn't a public apology, but it was momentum, a real shift. And in a system built on inertia, momentum was everything. Later that afternoon, Nicole messaged me again. Nicole, he's spiraling. The board's meeting early tomorrow. His assistant says he's calling in favors, trying to rewrite the story. You'd think he was running for office. I smiled faintly and typed back. Me. Let him try. I've got the truth. And a paper trail longer than his career. Tuesday came like a quiet drumbeat. And with it, the real showdown. At 10:55 a.m., I stepped into the executive boardroom on the top floor of the Candrix Labs tower. It was a room I'd only been in once before, years ago, when I stood in the corner while someone else pitched my architecture as teamwork. But this time, I didn't hover near the edge. This time, I walked straight to the chair marked with my name. Tristan was already seated across the table, arms folded, tie perfect, phone face down beside him, like a weapon he couldn't draw. His smile was there, but it was cracked at the corners. The board chair, Clara, opened the meeting with formalities, then turned to me. Avery, Thank you for joining us today. We've reviewed the licensing terms and documentation. We'd appreciate hearing your perspective directly before we deliberate. I stood, unfolded my notes, then set them down, and looked each board member in the eye. Leadership isn't about control. I said it's about clarity, about understanding the systems that keep your company alive, technical and human. When a new executive takes over, they can do one of two things: listen or bulldoze. Tristan chose the latter. No one interrupted me, not even Tristan. He terminated the person who built your operational core. He ignored contractual obligations. He dismissed internal warnings. And now you're all dealing with the fallout, not because of sabotage, but because of arrogance. I let the silence stretch. I didn't want a title. I didn't want control. I wanted acknowledgement. And when that didn't come, I let the system speak for itself. One board member leaned forward. If you were in his position, what would you have done differently? I smiled just slightly. I wouldn't be in his position. But if I were advising him, I'd tell him to lead with respect, not assumption. To ask before acting, and to never underestimate quiet people with the keys to the system. Clara nodded slowly. Thank you, Avery. You may step out while we deliberate. I did. I waited in the corridor outside, calm on the surface, but my heart pounding like a war drum beneath it. Then, raised voices behind the boardroom door. Not mine. His. Tristan was unraveling, blaming legal, blaming the CTO, even HR. But this time, the walls wouldn't hold the spin. At 11:47, the door opened. Clara stepped out, calm but firm. Avery, we've concluded our session. We'd like to speak with you again. I walked back in. Tristan was gone. Clara folded her hands on the table. Effective immediately, she said. Tristan Vale has been placed on administrative leave pending formal review. We will issue an internal statement clarifying the licensing matter and formally recognizing your contribution to Candrix's infrastructure. She slid a printed draft across the table. I read the first line aloud. We acknowledge Avery Morgan's innovation and intellectual property as vital to Candrix's success. It hit harder than I expected. Not because I needed it, but because I knew how many women in tech never got it. How would you like to proceed? Clara asked. I've agreed to the licensing deal, I said, but I'll also offer consulting, short-term, 90 days. I'll stabilize the system, train a successor, and help build internal safeguards. No return to full-time? I shook my head. I want autonomy, and I want to help fix what broke here. Clara nodded. Then we're lucky you stayed. I smiled gently. You are. And for the first time in 10 years, I walked out of that room not as a ghost in the server logs, but as the architect of the future. The internal announcement went live at 2:03 p.m. on Friday. Effective immediately, Tristan Vale has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into recent management decisions and contractual oversight. Candrix Labs formally acknowledges Avery Morgan as the architect and patent holder of our core infrastructure. Her licensing terms are now integrated into our operational framework. We are grateful for her continued partnership and leadership during this transition. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but inside the company, it dropped like a thunderclap. The hush that had shadowed the corridors for weeks was suddenly replaced by cautious smiles, quick nods. People whispering, thank you, under their breath. People who hadn't looked me in the eye since Tristan's arrival. But this wasn't about vindication. It was about visibility, about rewriting what corporate silence had tried to erase. The following Monday, I returned to the Candrix Tower, not as an employee, but as a consultant. Legal met me with a formal contract. Clean, precise, and built on everything they'd once failed to protect. And I brought more than just my expertise. I brought a framework, one designed not only to stabilize code, but culture. It included mandatory IP contract reviews during leadership transitions, a whistleblower policy tied directly to board oversight, mentorship programs for junior engineers focused on authorship, credit, and autonomy, an internal system for logging and surfacing innovation contributions from non-management staff because I hadn't come back to salvage what was. I'd come to build what could be. I stayed for 90 days. No more. I trained a successor, streamlined processes, fortified the system, answered questions no one had thought to ask before. And every time someone hesitated in a meeting, I looked them in the eye and said, "Say it, speak it, your voice counts." People asked if I had ever returned full-time. My answer was always the same: no. Because the system had changed, and so had I. One afternoon, 2 weeks before my exit, I stood outside the building finishing a call when a group of interns walked by. One of them, a young woman with curly hair, glasses too big for her face, and a laptop clutched to her chest, paused when she saw me. "Are you Avery Morgan?" I nodded. Her face lit up. "I just wanted to say thank you. What you did, it's kind of legendary. We talk about it all the time in our Slack channel. You made it okay to speak up." I smiled. Genuinely. "Then keep speaking up. Don't wait for permission." She nodded shyly, then ran to catch up with her group. And for a moment, I stood still. Not with pride, exactly. Something deeper. Legacy. That weekend, I took a train out of the city, switched off my phone, watched the world blur past the window as the skyline faded and trees replaced steel. No notifications, no noise. Just stillness. For the first time in years, my mind wasn't spinning with contingencies or code. It was quiet. It was peace. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in months. Only one line stood out when I closed it. I wasn't asking for power. I was asking for recognition. And when they couldn't give me that, I made my own table instead of begging for a seat at theirs. Weeks later, news trickled out. Tristan's administrative leave quietly became permanent. The official line was irreconcilable leadership differences. But inside Kendrick's, the culture shifted. Bit by bit, exit interviews were restructured, engineering milestones now included attribution and authorship. And for the first time, a company-wide memo went out crediting the engineers behind every core product. A few executives tried to rewrite the story, tried to paint me as always having been part of the team. I didn't correct them. I didn't need to. The people who mattered knew the truth. So did the code. My name was finally where it belonged. Not just in the system, but in the story. Months later, I received a letter, handwritten, from Clara Reese, the board chair. "Avery, you didn't just protect the infrastructure. You changed how we think about leadership. Not by shouting, not by burning the place down, but by standing firm in what was already yours. Thank you for showing us what real authority looks like." Clara. I keep it in the same drawer where my severance papers used to be, because every ending leaves something behind. And this one left me with a new beginning. Today, I run my own consulting firm. I work only with companies who understand that innovation doesn't live in boardrooms. It lives in people. In the builders, the quiet architects, the ones who never get the credit until the lights go out. And to anyone out there who's ever been overlooked, underestimated, or labeled too intense for simply knowing their worth, here's what I'll tell you. You don't need to shout to make an impact. You just need to know who you are. And never, ever hand that truth to someone who doesn't deserve to hold it. Because when they fire you thinking they've silenced you, all they've really done is light the match.